Hello again, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. So my name is Nella Arne, and as an audio description, I'm a white woman in my 30s with dark shoulder length hair, and I have a pink wall and a window behind me in the background. So I work with Visual Arts Southwest as network producer, and I'm hosting this event to acknowledge and to celebrate really the core outcomes of our program Together We Will, which we ran earlier this year. And the idea of the program was to bring the regional visual arts community together to collectively formulate a sector-led action plan for achieving long-term systemic change in our professional field here in the Southwest. And major part of the program was forming these 4 art worker advisory groups, each of which collectively developed these new recommendations for best practice to increase equal access to and also to foster fair, inclusive and hospitable working cultures in visual arts. And the groups focused on experiences of Black and POC art workers, disabled and neurodivergent art workers, LGBTQIA+ art workers, and young art workers. So these were the 4 groups. And they were facilitated by artist and educator Nazneen Ahmed, Emily Bull, who's producer at Creative Youth Network, Trish Whitley, who's the CEO of Disability Arts Online, and researcher, educator and curator DM Withers. And today's event marks the publishing of these advisory groups recommendations, which have been brought together as a new best practice guideline for arts organizations, institutions, and also independent arts organizers who work in a region. And we'll add the link to the recommendations in the chat so you can take a look. We shared a link in this event details email earlier today already, but just in case you haven't received it, you should have a link in the chat as well, so you can access the recommendations, and they're also on our website. But this is just for ease now. So we have a lineup of wonderful speakers who have in one way or another been involved in contributing to otherwise supporting the program along the way. So just to say briefly about who's here, artist Helen Kamek and Woodrow Kernahan, who's the director of John Hansard Gallery, are speaking today as co-chairs of Visual Arts Southwest. And then Abby Bayliss and Miles J. Linton and Yasmin Joan Qureshi participated in generating the recommendations across 3 advisory groups. So today Miles is contributing to the conversation as an artist and community organizer, sharing some of his experiences working as part of Kiki Bristol. And Abby and Yasmin are speaking from the perspective of emerging artists. And for full disclosure, both Abby and Yasmin are also part of the Visual Arts Southwest steering group, regularly guiding our work anyway in the long term. So we'll hear from all of our speakers first, and at the end of the event, we'll have a collective Q&A. And if you have any questions that you'd like to ask during the event, you can just write them into the chat and we'll compile them all together, and then we'll go through as many as we can at the end, and hopefully all speakers will be able to kind of chip in to your questions. And before, I feel like I'm speaking so long now, but before handing over to our kind of speakers proper, I wanted to speak about the reasons for and the aims and aspirations of embarking on a project like Together We Will and these recommendations. So where the project originally came from, we're still very much in the process of managing the very far-reaching impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on arts and culture. And still, we have already seen how the immediate economic effects of the pandemic amplified the inequity and unsustainable working conditions in visual arts almost immediately and with ongoing effects. And as part of this, alongside small organizations, freelancers, young people, and primarily Black people, colored, disabled, and neurodivergent art workers have been overrepresented in precarious employment and at the highest risk of also losing their income. And many people have lost their income as a result of the pandemic. And due to the precarious employment conditions and also chronically low pay in the sector, the visual arts systematically favors those with higher socioeconomic status. And at the same time, I think established organizations still need to address long-term standing institutional policies that allow some continuation of unfair treatment. And it could be argued, or perhaps I'd like to argue myself, that dismantling this structural inequality is an essential part of ensuring the kind of survival, development, and integrity of arts and culture in the UK. And these are the kind of core considerations that have been at work behind the Together We Will program. So the aspiration in formulating these recommendations for best practice is twofold. Firstly, the aim is to challenge leading organizations and organizations of all scales to rethink and fundamentally shift the ways that they work. And then secondly, pursuing this change in organizational practices and policies is, of course, it's rooted in an attempt to support art workers who are in most precarious position in relation to institutional structures, especially artists and freelancers and casual workers. And at the same time, we want to provide tools and vocabularies for communicating needs and boundaries to employers. And I feel that setting these clear demands for higher ethical standards in employment terms and working conditions also provides, I think, improved grounds for supporting individual employees in large-scale organizations to contest any sorts of detrimental working practices that might take place. And the next stage of Together We Will now is to challenge regional institutions and organizations to publicly pledge their commitment to these best practice recommendations. And we'll join this pledge ourselves as Visual Arts Southwest. There are already many pledges out there, and I'm painfully aware that these kinds of initiatives have been seen and heard many times before. And we also understand that it's very simple for organizations to express public profession of support and solidarity for specific communities, whilst continuing behind the scenes to maintain practices and behaviors that maybe are detrimental or at least not helpful to said communities. So because of this, we're spending some time this coming winter to put together a comprehensive kind of pledge scheme with some specific mechanics built into it. And the aim of this is to ensure that the pledge can and will actually generate tangible change instead of simply becoming another tag that an organization can add to their website, for example, without any visible or felt ways to demonstrate the changes that they're making. And this is why we are now working on outlining what exactly the responsibilities of pledging organizations would be, and if they join the pledge. And also we have to consider carefully our own responsibilities as the initiator of this whole endeavor. And because of this, we're hoping to offer organizations some support in implementing the recommendations in practice to establish this pledge as a positive kind of generative opportunity for everyone to learn new ideas and new ways of working. And at the same time, we'll need to implement an auditing system to help ensure that the organizations remain committed in the long term. And also we're looking to make some resources and support available for any artists and freelancers whose experiences of working with organizations who've expressed commitment, if the experience doesn't kind of correspond to the recommendations, and how to navigate that kind of a situation. So this is a very complex undertaking, and it will take some time, but we hope that it will be a generative starting point transforming working cultures in the Southwest visual arts. And this journey is also, it's important to say, connected to the national fair and equitable program of our umbrella organization, Contemporary Visual Arts Network. And this means that any solutions that we come up with and any successes and shortcomings that we may come across along the way, they'll support any related work done on a national scale as well. But the ultimate objective is to give everyone in the UK, not only in our region, equal access to, professionally and otherwise, to arts organizations as safe environments that have the desire, knowledge, and the means to consider their specific needs and experiences of the communities and publics they serve. So I think that's enough as an introduction from me. And I'm now going to hand over to our first speaker, artist and co-chair of Visualize Southwest, Helen Kamak.
Thank you, Nella. I will quickly describe myself. So I am a Black woman, I'm 51, I've got big silver hooped earrings and freshly shaven hair for today. And I'm wearing a burgundy top, and behind me there's a wooden door behind my chair. I decided, I haven't been part of the advisory groups, and so when Ella asked me to speak this afternoon, I decided that I just wanted to sit down and write something which was about what this kind of pledge, what these kinds of recommendations and what these kinds of policies actually mean, I think, to somebody who may be on the end of receiving those, and that's all of us. But in particular, I wanted to speak from my own perspective. So I hope it kind of makes sense, but really it's designed to be an introduction to the speakers that are coming after me, who have been doing a lot of the work. Okay, there are a couple of words that in what I'm writing, people might find offensive. They're in this as a way of storytelling, and they are describing a situation that happened. So I hope people can hear those words in context. I was born in the Midlands. We lived in a small village and I didn't go to school while we lived there, but my sister did. She was moved up a class because she was bright, great at reading and writing already at the age of 4. The older children in the new class terrorized her every playtime with sticks and with names. I didn't go to school until I was 5 and we'd moved to London. My experience there of race was that intersectionality struggled on the one hand, and on the other hand, it thrived. My friends were from different racial and cultural backgrounds, and no one's name sounded foreign in my ears. Homes that felt unfamiliar the first time, by the second time, were part of my landscape. They were our homes and our names, and I didn't see what was going on until we moved to secondary school and structural racism and classism gripped us tight, sent us all to different schools, placed us in different supposed ability streams, offered us different opportunities and aspirational thought maps. Some pushed and challenged at least, and some battles were overcome, but many were not. Then I moved to the Southwest, age 12, and I realized what it meant to be an alien, how I was seen and felt, until I became somehow normalized amongst my peers. And this process was about a year long because I learned how to be nimble. Otherwise, it would have been longer. I shouldn't have had to learn how to be nimble, to read all situations and to preempt, to forgive, placate and tolerate, to challenge and navigate every intentional and non-intentional aggression. We were spat at, shouted at, sworn at, and still we didn't hide or disappear because my father believed so strongly that we had the right to be seen and heard wherever we were in our world. 30 years later, my nephew was beaten at school by a group of boys shouting, "You fucking nigger," not because of his brown skin, but because even though he was born and lived in the same small village in Somerset his whole life, he was not new, an alien, but he was an alien because it served the purpose of the boys who thought him too precocious and too nerdy. At age 34, I applied to go to art school and was asked at the interview whether I would always only make work about women and Black people. I presented in my portfolio a project about my relationship to my father, and he was Black, and another that documented the training spaces and life situation of my kickboxing training partner at the time, who was a woman, a single woman with a small child. My existence was suddenly challenging to the white middle-aged male tutor as he sat on the other side of the desk. In my 40s, I made a short film with a group of young people excluded from the education system called Together Alone. It was about a number of different things, but actually could be reduced to a work about the needs of young people abandoned. At 51, I was introduced by a museum director to a group of people as Jamaican, even though I have never been there. I tell these stories because as people, unless we have been forced to, encouraged to, or needed to examine what we see, what we value, who we are in any given situation, then we inevitably make mistakes, cause pain, violate others, or minimize the experience of others. None of us are immune, of course, but some feel the pummeling impact more regularly, more deeply, and more enduringly than others. We see what we want to see and we hear what we want to see. And this, in my experience, isn't enough. We need other ways to understand the world and our place in it, the struggle, the enjoyment, the influence, the contribution, and the compromise. Together We Will is an attempt to formalize a challenge to major and micro injustices that many people face silently each day, socially, but also, as we're talking about, professionally. It is a way to try to ensure the landscape is richer and fuller, deeper and more complex. And this means that sometimes we are challenged, frightened, frustrated, angry, defending our subject position in any given macro or micro situation. We can talk about intersectionality because it is real. But we need to understand, acknowledge what our part is in the complex matrices that we inhabit. Formalized processes help us to guide the way when there is a lack of knowledge and awareness. To be flattened out when you are young is a crime. To be flattened out because you're a person of color is a crime. Because you're a person who is disabled or neurodiverse, because of your gender identity or sexual orientation, these are crimes against the potential of the human spirit. Individually and collectively, it builds myths and lies, and we don't need these in order to truly thrive together. Policies can feel laborious and boring and constraining, but they are vital and so often are the container that enables something exciting to happen if implemented with the care and commitment that they warrant. And only when they are understood as essential. We have the campaign already, art is essential. It is essential, but only if we are each enabled to contribute or to participate. And this is why language, a strategic voice in organizations, training, transparency, funding, pay, consistency, and some kind of accountability are the elements that are essential. The art context is built on local, national, and international networking, and artists are, from the moment they begin to call themselves an artist, asked to work for free or for very little. This never really leaves until you retire, unless you're a successful painter or you make expensive sculptures. And this is accepted, but we must change this. Networking is generally nepotistic by its very mechanisms. We must be aware of this and be cautious, because otherwise we build something that is a safety net for some and an impenetrable membrane for others. I know I don't say anything new here, just that I am aware and try to do my part whenever I make work or speak to colleagues or look for collaborators or people to participate with on projects. None of us can do it all or know it all, but we must hear the voices and act when encountering those who know and have experienced things we have not. There is no shame in making mistakes or admitting that we have not experienced something. The shame is when we ignore what we know or decide not to hear or see what we know is there, because inevitably we damage the path for someone else. I'll now hand over to some artists, makers, practitioners, and thinkers who I'm sure have some insights and ideas and experiences that will make us revisit what it means to work together and why it is truly our responsibility to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then next, I'd like to welcome Miles to share something about his work in Bristol.
Oh, that was so powerful. How do I follow that? I am going to share some slides. Great, fantastic. Okay, cool. So I am really pleased to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm Miles. Just for the audio description, I'm a black man in my 30s with afro hair, chunky glasses, and a beige chunky jumper. So within the kind of whole idea of Together We Will, I'm going to be specifically talking about art and community. I'll come on to what I'll talk about, but the main kind of crux of what I plan on discussing is how arts organizations can work better and more collectively with community groups, particularly community groups that center and support marginalized groups. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am. I'm going to tell you a bit about what Kiki Bristol is, and then I'm going to end with a bit of a reflection and a bit of a provocation around some of the instances of good and bad practice that I as an individual and we as a collective have encountered. So in terms of who I am, my main role is as a psychologist. So I'm an academic at the University of Bristol and the Elizabeth Blackwell Institute. I am really interested in young people's mental health, and a lot of my work actually is around exploring what are the main challenges that explain the rising levels of things like anxiety and depression amongst young people. I'm really interested in how technology is both a benefit and a potential harm around young people's mental health. And I'm really interested in how we develop policies and practices that support people when they're not feeling great. Aside from that though, I'm an artist and an illustrator, and a lot of the work I create is really heavily informed by my work as a psychologist. So this is just a kind of collection of things from the last year. As a figurative illustrator, I'm really interested in the connection between our bodies and how we think and feel, and how we can pay a bit more attention to that connection. This is some work I'm currently mainly focused on. It's a commission through Bricks Bristol for a public art program that's going to be based in St. Paul's. So the first image is me on a building site in the hotel that's being built, trying to work out where my work will go. The second is me in collaboration with Cabot Neon, who are a really incredible glass neon organization in the city, who are helping turn my design into a full neon installation. And the third image is a prototype of one of the 15 pieces of stained glass that will make up the final piece. And the artwork in full will be unveiled, I'm hoping, at some point early next year. So that's really exciting. One of the other roles I have is I'm on the board of directors of Make, fantastic Bristol-based live performance organization that does many things, including supporting artists, but also runs Mayfest, which is usually every other year. So this is an image from one of the previous Mayfests. But that aside, the main thing I'm here to really talk to you about is the work I do at Kiki Bristol. So Kiki Bristol, or Kiki, is a community group that creates, supports, champions, centers the creation of safe and welcoming spaces, social activities for QTPOC people in the Southwest and sometimes beyond. And I'll use the word QTPOC throughout this talk to refer to queer, trans, and intersex people of color. And I just want to say that a lot of these terms and umbrella things can sometimes be helpful in terms of us identifying specific communities, but they also are very imperfect. So I use them sparingly, but they bit of a love-hate relationship with some of these terms, but we have found that use of that word quite useful. A question that I think we and similar groups like us always get asked is, why do we exist? Why do we need a Kiki? Why do we need things like UK Black Pride? Why do we need spaces that center us? And I think first and foremost, because we deserve spaces where we can relax and connect. But also because I think within the climate of spaces that should, and in theory, should be welcoming for members of the QTPOC community, we often find that they aren't always that way. So this is just some data from Stonewall, their LGBT in Britain report from 2018, and it just sort of flags that, at least in the respondents they sampled, half of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic LGBT people reported experiencing discrimination or poor treatment from other people in the LGBT community, specifically due to their ethnicity. So it isn't necessarily always the case at all, and that's not what I want to leave you thinking, but there is certainly a case of being QTPOC in the LGBT community not necessarily protecting you from mistreatment and discrimination. So really, we exist because we need spaces where we can feel welcome, we can feel centered, and we can not feel othered by people who've been othered by the majority. He is organized by 7 people, so that's Peter, Sharifa, Edson, Linda, Rose, Laura, and me. We all do this on a voluntary basis. So we organize Kiki as in terms of the management of it on a voluntary basis. And really, we create opportunities for people to listen. So this is a picture from our Celebrating Black Queerness event in the RWA before the pandemic, which was fantastic. We had Lady Phil from UK Black Pride. We had Josh Rivers from Busy Being Black. We had Travis Alabanza, fantastic theatre maker and writer who created Burgers, amongst many other great things. We also create opportunities and gather people who want to speak up and be vocal about the ongoing difficulties experienced by our communities. And this is an image from a group within Kiki marching at Bristol Pride in 2019. And then just finally, we also create opportunities where people can connect. And this might be one of my favorite images that have ever been taken at a Kiki event. It was a collaboration between Queer Vision, Bristol Pride, and Kiki Bristol, where we showed a bunch of films. This was our first in-person event after the final lockdown, and it was just fantastic to be able to gather in small group, but to have the opportunity to chip away at some of the isolation that I know so many people experienced during the height of the lockdowns. A longer list of what we do is everything from supporting book launches to film festivals. We do a lot of panel talks. We've been featured in the news, a lot of DJ nights, a real mix of things that kind of take place in the day and the evening. We go into organizations and schools and stuff like that. So I hope what you can take from this slide is really that we work really collaboratively. We don't have a physical premises ourselves, so we often rely on working with other kind of arts-based organizations and other places in and around the city to host and create the things that we do. And I think along the way, and this is really what the rest of my talk anyway is going to focus on, is some of the themes around good and bad practice that I think we've experienced as a community group. It kind of centers around three kind of ideas. And I did just want to kind of caveat this by saying this is only my experience. I can't really speak on behalf of the entire community or all community groups, but these are some of the themes and patterns that have emerged for me that will hopefully help you if anyone here is interested in doing similar things where you're working with kind of community groups, particularly for marginalized groups, can think about. Some of it may sound really simple, but sometimes the simple stuff is what gets missed off. So I really want to start by talking about money, because money does matter. It can be an uncomfortable topic, but I think groups like us regularly do get contacted to support organizations in their efforts to, for example, address and form their anti-racist strategies and, you know, support organizations to move forward without the expectation that that time, effort, energy, and those ideas would ever be remunerated in any way. And I think it's a trend and an idea that we really have to do away with. You know, I think we have to start thinking about, if we're not already, you know, the way in which expertise really has to be valued, and the many ways that we think of when we think of the word value. I think we need to definitely do away with the idea that somehow exposure is a form of payment. That's, at least where I'm from, not something that's going to pay my bills. I think, and I don't say that flippantly, because I really do think sometimes we just have to have better conversations about how our energy is spent. I think there are often times where groups like us aren't paid, or we're not paid on time, which can have real implications for us, particularly many of us with multiple jobs, multiple commitments. And I think we also, I think, you know, groups coming to groups like Kiki have to really think about the costs required for accessibility and whether additional funds can be made available to make sure that the people we bring into your spaces are safe and well looked after. I want to talk about Awareness Month, and I know this can sometimes be a bit controversial. So it's not that I'm against Awareness Month at all, actually. I think that the point I want to make on this slide is that we have to think about action beyond these months. We have to think about not ticking boxes, not programming activities and assuming that, for example, Black history isn't everyone's history or isn't history that's relevant in other times. And it's not just in terms of Black history. Yeah, we need to get to a point where these activities aren't limited to really heavy periods of the year, where actually groups like us are really inundated with very late requests for support of other people's events, which so often are really fantastic and really, really energizing. And we can absolutely accommodate that, but we do just have to keep in mind that these initiatives and strategies have to be year-long pursuits if they're going to be anything other than optics. And yeah, also getting in contact well in advance is really important. I mean, yeah, not to get too specific, but often requests will come at the middle of a month like Black History Month, where a really big ask with no financial or any other type of remuneration will come. And it's just really not an opportunity that it would be fair a group like us to necessarily facilitate. And then the final thing, which is a lot more conceptual, I really wanted to talk about and almost end on, is this idea of kind of joy and pain. And I just want to kind of underline that, you know, QT-POC experience extend way beyond, you know, marginalization and trauma. So we really want to link up with other organizations and run events and, you know, put on activities around community building and celebration and joy, not just addressing racism, which of course is an incredibly important thing to do, but like the work of community groups has to extend beyond things like racism and homophobia, because we are whole people who deserve to have the wholeness of our experiences brought to the table. I, in the process of kind of working with different organizations and talking about the topic, have just kind of put together for my own benefit, really more than anything else, kind of a set of key questions that I think organizations that approach community collectives like Kiki should be thinking about at some point along the way and during those kind of collaborations. And there isn't time to go through all of them. I think because this session is being recorded, if anyone wants to, they can always go back and check a few of them out. But yeah, it's worth thinking about the way in which the remuneration involved might reflect the value that you do or don't place on the time of marginalized groups. It's always worth thinking about what the reputation of your organization already is and who is usually in the spaces that you occupy. And yeah, a bunch of questions. How ready are you to have uncomfortable conversations, and what will you do with that insight that has been generated? And this is really my last slide. Just as a call to action or a plea or a hope more than anything, actually, that we'll start to move away from these often, but not always, surface level, sometimes performative tick box activities towards really meaningful engagement, thoughtful engagement, sustained action, and partnerships that are less like, which is sometimes find kind of fleeting activities, and more towards strategies that can actually make change. So thanks a lot for listening. I hope some of this has been useful. If you only remember what's on one slide, then maybe this one, to take a mental note. And yeah, I will be sticking around for questions as well. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from the other speakers.
Great. I think we're on a really good roll. So let's just move on. And yes, please do any thoughts that you have in chat, like Miles just reminded kindly, please do add them into the chat and we can discuss your points at the end. Yasmin, would you be ready to step in and share your work with us?
Amazing, thanks Nella, and it's been great to hear everyone as well. Looking forward to the full event and hearing the questions at the end. But yeah, so descriptions. I'm Yasmin Qureshi, my pronouns are she, her. Description, dark hair, wearing quite a chaotic grey and white jumper, colourful background with things I've collected and coats. Yeah, that's that. I'll just kind of do something sort of similar to Helen, of it being more of a personal journey for me and what I've gotten from coming into the industry, part of the Together We Will campaign, and being a part of the steering group and hearing sort of the different conversations and what I hope can be more of an outcome, following the campaign, and what else is going to happen following that, which would be amazing. So I'm an artist based in Bristol. I sort of run workshops as well, and I'm currently working in doing a sort of evaluation of different programs. So I'm doing bits of kind of everything at the moment. I was gonna just remembered share my screen sort of with a bit of my work, just as it's something to look at while I'm talking, maybe, if you want. So a lot of my practice is sort of around capturing moments and experiences and telling a story. I currently have a project called Red Telephone, which is about, it kind of originally started, many different versions, but originally started as a thing of documenting an experience, putting it in kind of a frozen moment, and then letting it out to an audience to see how they interpret it. It's really developed into so many different versions over the last years, but at the moment I've been kind of creating these little weird characters from this sort of therapeutic technique called squiggle drawing, and it's kind of a process to pull different things out of your brain, and I've really enjoyed turning them into their own characters, putting them in their own scenes, and it's just something I'd love to explore more going forward, of just finding ways to express myself and like put my work out there and do sort of animated things and weird little stories about I kind of have my own anxieties and things. I like to put it into the work and it being maybe its own story, and that'd be something, a goal for the future. But a lot of this work is around kind of finding a piece that connects, you can connect to, it's an accessible thing and it's something that people can engage with. I've been, alongside this practice, I run workshops with my mom, who's a psychotherapist, and we do sort of art therapy workshops so people can create their own drawings and turn them into objects, and that be something they take away with them, and it's something they've been able to explore within that workshop and can take forward. So a big part of my practice I've been keen to do, finding a way to sort of mold that in some place, is to sort of have an audience but also participants, and then also alongside my practice, and it's something that can be quite collaborative and be pulled together. And then sort of alongside that, a classic, doing quite a few jobs of at the moment I'm working with Rising Arts Agency, a Bristol-based organisation that support young artists, creatives, makers, sort of people that are just making big, sort of want to make big change, and it's quite a powerful organisation that provides training and support, just a network to be able to take your work, amplify it and share your voice. And at the moment I'm sort of doing work around evaluation, which can sound a bit like sort of quite dry, and similar to what Miles said, of doing more work around it not being just like the surface level tick box. It's more about really truly getting the feedback from people within programs, running these programs, contributing back to funders to sort of say, this is where we're at, this is what we want, and it being something for the long term. And it's really nicely kind of come together with my own practice of documenting and like pulling that information together and making it accessible for everyone, and it just be something that can be used in other areas, which is something I'm really interested in. So I'm realizing I might go off on mini tangents, but hopefully there'll be some direction in this. Sort of doing all these things has been amazing. It's something, the place I'm in at the moment, it's really exciting. But actually to get to this point, I didn't think I said before, but I'm 26, so was sort of quite chaotic and quite challenging. As sort of a young person, I'm of dual heritage as well, and sort of coming into a space that is not really, like, quite alien and quite strange. So I came, I did the classic, come to Bristol for uni, never leave, because it's a great city. And I really found university quite challenging personally. I look back on it thinking I don't think I should have done university, but in my head it was like, you go, you do uni, you get a job, I don't know, like whatever you're taught at school. And it sort of, I kind of came out feeling very like stuck and lost and not quite sure where I'm going. And then I sort of, after a while of kind of volunteering and hovering around places, I engaged in sort of different small arts organizations and took part in a lot of programs that I've set up to connect different artists together, either kind of create an event that can connect to the young artists, or be part of like mentoring training and things like that. And then this is kind of where the next step for me came into place, where I realized I just kind of came into the space of like, I don't know what I'm doing, like I don't know how to go forward, like how do you make a career out of this, like how do I develop my art practice, like how I just never heard that, I don't know how to do that. And the only thing I felt I could do was to just hover around the space. And I'm using the word hover quite a lot because it kind of makes sense to me and what it means, but just to go into a bit more detail, I sort of was a part of these programs more of like a training basis, and then I realized like there were different studio spaces and there was like a physical space. So I would turn up to the space on different events or networking things or little trial days where I can be there. And I would just stay there and I would hover around and I'd try and talk to as many people as I could. And then after doing that quite a lot and sort of maybe exposing myself to sharing what I'm doing, which is totally terrifying, and actually be honest with myself of where I want to go, it did seem to get me somewhere where I ended up sort of working and doing sort of paid work to be actually in that space. And sorry, I'm going to keep looking off because this is where my notes are, but I realized, oh wow, this is the way in the door. You just stand there and then you wait, and then months go by and then someone will be like, this person and then you kind of get a bit further along. But it's funny, taking quite a lot of time to think about this talk, it made me realize when I say hover, I'm like, is that kind of a negative thing? Because it's just, I sort of saw it as, oh, I clearly don't belong in this space, so I'm just going to stand here until I'm going to linger, I'm going to just be around until something sparks, something happens. And a lot of that was quite a fear thing for me, where it was like, oh, I need to do everything, I need to say yes to everything, I need to make myself unwell to just be here and to be able to go through the door, and no one's going to forget who I am if I'm just here. Like, if I never leave, you'll know who I am. And that was kind of something that I sort of ended up doing quite a lot, and it felt like, oh, that was the thing I do. That's how. And a lot of people would ask me, how did you know that person, how did you get there? And I'm like, because I'm just hovering around, just trying to find my place. And then so I kind of realized, oh, actually that was great, but I could want to find the classic business term, but I feel like it's kind of accurate, like find my tribe and just find the people that really are quite connected to the things I'm interested in. And so then carrying on into the hovering thing, I started going to talks specifically at the Face of Media studio and just learning about just different sort of, I know it's kind of like a chemical art and technology, just hearing from different organizations and individuals about what they're currently working on, and just sort of sitting there listening, taking it in, sitting there listening every week. Just I love soaking that up. I love hearing what people are doing and the things that are going on around all the different, not even just in Bristol Southwest, just across the world really. And I felt so inspired by it and empowered by it, and I would kind of challenge myself to go and then maybe talk to a person and then give my card out maybe, and things like that. And it really started something for me where I connected with someone who was really important for me to really take my work off the ground, dive into it, and where I was able to run my art sort of and therapy Skuggle workshops with my mom, and we did that at the studio and ended up doing a talk myself, which was quite a nice like full circle moment of this is where it all started, and then I can kind of round it off at that talk. But it was such an important moment to connect with someone and they say, you know, you can do this, like I'm telling you now. It's like getting permission to do it, and I was like, oh, I'm allowed to do this, that's amazing. So that was very impactful for me, and I realized that I could be more than a hoverer, you know, like, because just thinking about that the other day of it was maybe the start for me, and maybe it's not a negative thing, but then I'm like, I think I've proven myself now. I feel like I'm in the circle, I've been let into the room, I'm allowed to be there, I'm at the table. So I don't think I'm hovering anymore, I feel like I belong here. And so, and a big part of that, of sort of really carrying those collaborations on and connecting with people, and I really wanted that to be something I picked up in all of this, was meeting people and working directly with people and learning. It's just something that I find really interesting and really powerful. And it's sort of something that keeps cropping up a lot, of working with my mom. And a lot of people are like, how do you work with your mom? That's quite family and stuff, but it's sort of quite, it's the combination of different industries and different people and bringing that together, and it's different generations, and that being something that felt really big in my practice and sort of working with others. And so going into that, my oh man, I've kind of gone off on more of a tangent. So again, with sort of the workshops, it brought in people that I don't think would normally go towards maybe creative workshops or attend different exhibitions, or it wasn't, I feel like I meet people sometimes that feel that that isn't their space, and it's a strange thing that is kind of an issue where it's not easily accessible for everyone, and it's just quite frustrating realizing that throughout this process that was quite a big thing that I wanted to do, is make sure it's accessible and make sure that if alongside this workshop someone is able to access this, or if I can introduce something and people can come forward and realize, oh, actually, like, I'm allowed to go into a gallery, which sounds maybe silly to some people if they've always felt like they can be there, but it's not easy to walk into a space and know that actually, do I belong here? Like, it's very challenging. So that's been something that I've been passionate about, is being a part of like organizations and projects where it can really encourage people to step in the space and know they are supposed to be here. So a big thing coming into the Together We Will campaign was really, I was able to attend the neurodivergent artists who are disabled and the young artworkers groups, and sort of hearing particularly from the young artworkers perspective of it being how to get to this place. And it's something that I realized there was kind of a weird path that I took, but it was sort of something I feel like I can't really tangibly say how you get to a place, but then, and it feels like things are set up in a way where it's like, cool, if you're in this place and you're in this moment, you can go and you can go do it. But what about like it being accessible for everyone? Like what is it that, why can't it just be people put a bit more time into something and sort of not making that sort of weird exclusive, you can't be here if you're not going to do this. It should be welcome to all. So it was something that I'm sort of really passionate to bring that into the conversation of it's been amazing because sometimes I'm able to sort of see what other projects are going on and how people are working together. And there was something I was speaking to someone about recently of it sort of running programs that support emerging artists, give studio spaces, mentoring and things, but then it's like how to make that an accessible opportunity where it's not just you have to hit all these targets and then you're allowed to be here. It's just, it accommodates people who are working multiple jobs, who don't feel like they're allowed in the space. Like it's pulling people out and sort of pulling them into something that's like, you are supposed to be here, this is for you. And it's, for me, it was like, it's a weird flicking of a switch in my head of like, oh wait, I don't have to hover. But if we can just like get past all the crap and allow people to just sort of be here and give opportunities, and it just be something that you can use to bring yourself forward and pull people up. Like I feel like we all need to be, it's sort of this old idea of it's a creative and visual arts, or sort of this industry is sort of so competitive, it's so, there's no place for you, it's blah, blah, blah. But it's just like, it really, really, really doesn't have to be like that. It can be, it's all supporting each other. It can be making sure that if we're not sure how to make it more inclusive, like let's talk to more people, let's do what I do, turn up to talks and like listen to sort of different perspectives. And so yeah, I'm hoping that from the campaign and from the policy change, it can really teach places across the sort of sector that it isn't such a hidden, like spooky thing to make things inclusive and accessible. And it shouldn't be an afterthought, and it shouldn't be an add-on that we don't think of. It really needs to be more concrete, like rooted into what everyone does, and hopefully it can be something that can help things more in the long run. Like it's not going to be a one-off funded project. It's helping sort of like give that structures for it to be ongoing, and it's to be for everyone kind of thing. Big things to say, but I think it is possible, and it's been amazing that these groups have heard so many perspectives and so many different voices in terms of like what works, what doesn't work, like what can we actually be doing. And it's great that it's like, it's not just a conversation, it's not something that's going to be put to the back, it's literally something that's going to be people are going to take action with, and it's like really exciting to see that. So I think I'm going to stop talking now. But yeah, thanks so much for coming and hearing what we have to say. But yeah, really excited to hear everyone else for the talk.
It was really, really lovely to hear you talk about this, these very abstract, informal, support structures that are sometimes there, sometimes they're not, and how difficult it is to find them. So thanks. It's very tricky territory to kind of put into words. Thank you. Then next up, I've got Abby. Welcome, Abby.
Cool. Hi. Thank you. Yeah. Yasmin, that was really good. Yeah, I feel like I might be reiterating a lot what people have said, but it drives it home, so that's really good. An audio description of me: I'm a mixed race woman in her early 20s. I'm actually 20, so I should just say 20. I have long brown curly hair, and I have a beige wall behind me, and I'm wearing a knit brown vest. And I'll share my screen now, hopefully, if that works. Cool. So hopefully everyone can see that. And hear me as well. So yeah, systematic change within our visual arts sector. So I think I'm just going to be talking a bit about me, what I do. And yeah, I attended 2 of the advisory groups, so just sort of points that really stuck out to me and was good to talk about, and why this change is important. So a bit about me. So my visual arts practice celebrates Black joy, culture and beauty through a mix of digital mediums and collage. And these have kind of come out in lots of different formats. I've done multiple exhibitions, quite a lot in Bristol. I'm from Bristol, I was born here. I still study now in Bristol and I've never left because I just love Bristol. So yeah, I've shown a lot here, and I've made a few children's books as well with an author who's a friend of mine, so I've illustrated them. Yeah, so I'd say I'm an artist, but also an illustrator as well, doing books and things like that. And that also centers around a Black family and just joy and yeah, just happy stories. And also billboards. I did a billboard campaign with Rising Arts Agency over the summer. So yeah, there was artwork all across the city in Bristol, which was amazing, and that had a similar theme. And articles and murals. I just like doing things big on a big scale and just seeing my work in lots of places. So more about me, I like working in schools and youth groups and just showing how the arts is an attainable career, and it should be something that's pushed and encouraged as much as any other career, and just kind of validating that artistic side you get. What I think you lose as you get older, and it's not you lose it, it's kind of squashed out of you. So I really like going into schools, like from primary school age, secondary school age, even younger than that, with families when they're still sort of really young, and just inciting that love or creativity and just making sure that they know it's possible and it is fun. Over the summer I did lots of workshops in a primary school that is around literally a 5-minute walk from my house, so it's really nice to sort of do things locally. And I think that's why I stayed here, just having connections with all the schools that I went to, and just going back is just like a really nice full circle moment. And I'm really sort of connected with my primary school and my secondary school, so going back and doing workshops around the arts and just showing them the books I've done, or inviting them to exhibitions and just doing workshops and just seeing things that they create and just validating it as much as possible, because you never know what impact that might make on someone. I think I was really lucky. I went to really creative primary schools and secondary schools, and that definitely is why I think I was, I would say, empowered maybe to go into the arts so young. I kind of started at around 15, 16, because I think the schools that I went to really encouraged it, and there was arts all on the walls, there was murals, we had artists come in, we would always go to galleries at school and have sort of just days when we would just make things, and that definitely incited a love for the art sector, which is why I think I'm so passionate about it and want to sort of give back to the schools that I went to make sure they're still doing that. So yeah, that's something I really love doing. Another thing, I recently worked on a podcast with the National Trust to help engage young people with nature for their well-being. So this was also through Rising Arts Agency, who I'll talk a bit more about later because I love them so much. And yeah, it was kind of a project to get a group of young artists or young makers or creatives and thinkers and work alongside the National Trust to create any outcome we want, anything we were free with. So other people worked on the project, created things completely different. And I'm not even an audio sort of storyteller, artist. So it was really kind of a free project to experiment with any kind of medium we wanted to tell any story we wanted to. So my sort of main themes and things I like sort of talking about and exploring are well-being and representation. And this was a really good thing, I think, that would work alongside the National Trust, because, you know, great green spaces and everything like that and well-being kind of go hand in hand, I think, personally for me. So using that as a way to sort of show how these spaces should be more accessible, especially to young people from working class backgrounds like myself, or people that don't have access to these green areas. So that was something that was really important for me to create. And maybe just, I like using it myself, the podcast that we made. So I think I found it fun, and hopefully a lot of other people did too. So that was really fun to work on. So yeah, those are things that I like to sort of talk about. So heritage, culture, Black joy, yeah, youth groups in schools. I also run workshops with the RWA to family groups and children. So that's something I love doing as well. And yeah, just like well-being and things like that. So that's a bit about me before I carry on. So why is change in the sector important? So these are some points that I think are really important to me, especially because being an artist myself and also working within the arts, it's nice to sort of see the outcomes of things you're doing for the industry you want to go into, or are currently in, just to improve the environment and sort of for other people you're working alongside. So number one, we can't call ourselves a community without everyone being at the table. And when I say being at the table, I mean being listened to, engaged with, and valued, because there's one thing to be at the table, but there's another thing to have your ideas heard, and then another thing for them to be influenced and implemented. So that is something that's really important to me, and I'll probably go into that a bit later. But yeah, number two, if we don't consistently reflect on our organization's methods, we will rebuild the structures we want to avoid whilst believing we're being progressive. So I think they're just expanding on that. Big sentence. With what we're trying to achieve with sort of diversity and inclusion and making our sector a real community of artists, like across the region, across different backgrounds, is that we can kind of think it's an end goal, and it's something that has to be achieved, and then we've achieved it, but it's something that we need to keep on reflecting and looking back on, and like assessing ourselves, like you would do with any project really. If you have any sort of thing you're working on, there is no end goal. I think, especially for me being a perfectionist, you can always get better, and there's always things that you don't know and always things you can improve on. So kind of consistently just reflecting and evaluating your practice and sort of keeping it up to the original standards you have. Otherwise we can kind of fall into the trap thinking that we're doing the best we can and we're not. So that's something that we need to sort of think about. And number three is just very simply, you have to genuinely believe that diversity is a good thing. Simple as it sounds, you actually have to believe that it's a good thing and see why it's a good thing for you and for everyone and any organization you work with. It's not just something to, I mean, I'm sure people wouldn't admit this, but it's not something that just ticks a box and they think, oh, it's happy we have someone in here that's different from everyone else, we can tick that box. No one would admit it, but a lot of people think that. So you have to genuinely believe it's a good thing. Otherwise, there's going to be no benefit to anyone, because if you don't believe it, then how are you going to listen to the person and make them feel valued and engage with them and make sure everyone's sort of equal voices are being heard? So yeah, you have to genuinely believe that, otherwise that's a lot of work. So the first group I was part of was the Black Artworkers advisory groups. So these are just some summaries of points that I thought really stuck out to me, and I just really enjoyed discussing with everyone else. So I'll work through them as I go along, but just to sort of summarize, I found myself, it was really, really lovely, I think, to just be with a group of other artists and just talking about our shared experiences, and just learning how other people have dealt with things, just hearing other people's sort of experiences. Like I said, I think I'm 20, so I guess you could say I'm still quite young into it, but I did kind of start trying to get into the art sector at 15, so it has been a few years. So still just seeing other Black art workers and people in the industry that I'm in, or I want to progress to sort of like their level, it's just been good to hear from other people. And I'll just go through the points that stuck out to me, or things that I thought were really interesting and wanted to expand on. So Bristol's diversity doesn't equal Bristol's inclusion, and I'm sure not everyone here is from Bristol, but being a proper Bristolian myself, a lot of my points are going to be around Bristol, but they can be applied to any city really. So I'm sure when people come to Bristol and they see the city, automatically it's, wow, it's so diverse, it's so great to see a city like this, which definitely is a big appealing thing to everyone, and it is definitely really good in comparison to other cities. But I worked on a project, not this summer, last summer, at the M Shed, showing the sort of everyday life of teenagers and young people in Bristol. I think it was called 21st Century Kids, and it's still up. And alongside all of the stories of these people, there was like statistics about the city, and one of the statistics was I think Bristol schools are 37% of Bristol schools aren't white British compared to the 22% average of the rest of the UK, which sounds very progressive, and it is a good statement to have. But also when you back it up with another statement, it's that Bristol is one of the most racially segregated cities in the UK. And I say one of the most, it is the most racially segregated city outside of like the London area. So against like Manchester and Birmingham and everything like that, which, you know, makes you see that first statement in a different light. So I think when applying that within the art sector, diversity is a great thing, but the inclusion and the relationships between these different sides of Bristol aren't as interconnected as I think it should be. So yeah, just diversity doesn't equal inclusion, which I think we all know, but it's just nice to reiterate it, because a lot of the time people can think that having, you know, one Black artist suddenly makes their whole program really diverse, and it's not really on the whole shoulders of that artist to carry the program for you, which we'll go on to a bit more. But it's just a nice sort of thing I thought I should have brought up. And also, like I already said, inclusion isn't an end point, but something always needs reflection. So there's inclusion in lots of different ways, also at the same time, and it is something that isn't just a goal that needs to be achieved. It's something that always needs to be sort of reflected on and implemented. So yeah, that was something that I found really interesting just to talk and share experiences about. Another one which I think I might go into quite a big depth is limiting Black creatives to ethnic arts, in quotation marks. And something, me being an artist myself, I find this a lot, and I put example Black History Month, which has just gone, and for the last 3 years I found Black History Month to be the busiest work month for me every year, which is, I mean, on the positive note, I'm getting lots of work, but when you break it down, it is so stressful for me as an artist. Even months coming up to Black History Month, which I really enjoy seeing everyone's work, I know that I'm going to suddenly get loads of requests for work, and then a lot of the time never hear from these people again, which is me being a young artist needing to pay rent. I think I'll take all this on, but then also when I sort of look at it, it is a really stressful time for me, because people kind of reach out. I think Miles already sort of said about it needing to be well in advance, otherwise it is kind of just thrust upon you with the expectation that you should do it, especially if it comes from a really good organization that you're dying to work with and pays well. And it is kind of, yeah, just thrust upon you, and it is a very stressful month, and it comes from a viewpoint that the organizations reaching out to you, they probably didn't hear about you that day. They've probably had you in their mind for a while, because you probably don't hear about someone in 1 minute and email them the next. So it is people that have known you or have seen your work, and I've kind of limited you to a month of when that's going to be the month they contact you. And I mean, at the end of the day, I'm Black 12 months of the year, and I'm not just working that month. So it is kind of about, Black History Month is a great month to, you know, promote the Black artists that you know and you work with, but also it's not just a month, it extends outside of the month, and it is something that you know, should be celebrated every day of the year. I mean, you should have Black artists just as everyday sort of whatever month it is. It's just great to have Black artists and a diverse roster of artists that you're working with. So that is something that is really important to me. And also just focusing on the word limiting, it does get to a point where being a Black artist, it is expected of you to create work on identity and heritage and culture, which I do a lot, which is a double-edged sword for me, because I enjoy doing that, but I do it from a viewpoint of joy and family and things I like talking about. But it does get to the point where you can tell people want to hear the like negative sides or the hardships of it. And yeah, so it's just not pigeonholing Black artists to creating Black art all the time, because anything I make is going to be Black art. So it is, yeah, just important. So yeah, sustaining relationships and recommending to other organizations, similar to what I said, just sustaining that relationship you have throughout the year, and not sort of cutting them off once you've use them is a really important thing. I think we all sort of talked about in the group. Yeah, shaking up the diversity throughout the programming departments, and that's diversity throughout the chain. You can have diversity, but it's all sort of on the lower end scale of the pyramid, you would say, but it's about all through the workplace. Just talking about my mum, to look at the office she works in. She doesn't work in the arts sector, education, but similarly, the office she works in, extremely diverse, but the issues they have because of the management not being diverse, or the management only having one person working in that role who's Black, and all of the work getting thrown upon them, is, you know, where the power imbalance comes. Even with diversity, there's still the whole power imbalance within the sort of how the structure is laid out. And then also within programming departments, specifically in the arts, I know when I've created work on sort of like family and culture and heritage, just it does, I feel like I'm talking way too much, someone stop me if I am. It does get to a point where you know that the work you're creating is intended for a white audience, and that whole expectation that's sort of given to you of having to make double the amount of work to explain something that you probably wouldn't have if you were a white artist presenting your work. So that's just something to bear in mind. And then programming with communities rather than for communities. I think just sort of the word for gives that distance of you're sort of above the community you're working with, but it is about, you know, what you can learn from each other and working with communities, so you know what to provide them rather than thinking you know what to provide for them. And, you know, you can learn a lot with each other. And then physical spaces, are they welcoming? And this can be sort of put in any kind of question about the arts. I know when I worked at the Arnolfini throughout the summer, we had a time where we still do it now, had beanbags in the galleries to make sure that people felt like they were welcome in the space, and it's not just a space that has this cold, like what a lot of people who aren't interested in art will imagine an art gallery to be, cold and you have to stand still and you're not allowed to talk. It does break down that sort of barrier, and just having a nice sort of welcoming space for people. And even if your organization has a cafe, it goes down to like what's on the menu. How well do you sort of think about your visitors and making sure it's an inclusive sort of welcoming space. And then lastly on this group, organizations developing relationships with early career artists of color on potential similar to their white counterparts rather than experience. And that is something that personally I found a lot of, that I've trying to get into the arts so young, I've known that I had to build up a lot of experience just to prove to the point where I'm at now, in comparison to my white sort of counterpart artists who are more judged on potential and not their experience. So it's just sort of like microaggressions that can go overlooked, but need to be sort of held accountable for and considered. I could literally go on about this topic for hours, but I will move on. So the Young Art Workers advisory groups were also really, just similarly, really great to talk to other people and hear their experiences, and just pulling out points that I think we could all benefit from, especially being 20 and in this position now. I'm finding this amazing that I get to talk to people in the industry I'm in, to say things that I would have wanted 5 years ago and things I still want now. So it's it's really good. So valuing time and contribution through paid work, as simple as it sounds, that is it. Paid work, it sort of validates the industry that you're trying to get into, and the work that I'm making, because, you know, saying great things about being paid in exposure or this and that, it's great, but, you know, without the actual payment to back it up, it's not going to make me think as a young artist, this is something I can make a living out of, like everyone says, and this is too hard, or get a normal job. So that is something that if you want young people to stay in the arts sector, you have to pay them. Otherwise, they're not going to think it's possible. So free, affordable space to make, store and exhibit work. Coming from a working class single parent family, I had nowhere to store my work. like the whole house was just covered in my artwork. There's still, in my older brother's room, there's a canvas the size of the wall because I have nowhere to put it. I have nowhere to put anything. I mean, since moving out, I have more space, but just growing up as a young artist, I had nowhere to put anything. So just having space to make work and store it and exhibit it especially, but also make it as well, because I had nowhere to make it either. The rooms were so small, there was no way I could make a mural in there. So, and where do you find the space to make that? So that's something really important to me. Freelance mentoring. So, you know, as a young artist, when you sort of start being an artist, a lot of people just go straight into freelance because you think that's what you do. Like automatically, that's how you learn. But who teaches you how to do these things? Who teaches you about funding bids and taxes and all these other things that you didn't get taught at school or even in university? So it is kind of, where do you learn these things? And a lot of people have the fear that they're going to get this wrong, so they don't go into it. Having young people properly integrated into programs, and when I say properly, I mean not having them as a side project, but as something that's actually, you know, is making a difference, of having a young person on a board or in a program. Like similarly to the other sort of conversation about Black art workers, it's the inclusion of, you know, you have to actually think that's a good thing for them to be on your board and actually utilize what they're saying in order for it to make an impact. And then demystifying progression routes and sector jargon, which is still something, the second one, I still don't get sector jargon. I'm still very confused by a lot of the terminology. So especially if you're applying for a job and understanding what does entry level mean, or what does this mean, just sort of clearing up these things and clearing up progression routes. Just like when you go to school and, you know, all you think about being an artist is being a painter. You don't know about the millions of jobs there are in the arts. So maybe even working alongside schools or community groups and things like that to show and break down what's in the arts. Before I worked at the Arnolfini, I would have thought there's probably a director, someone that puts the work up, and the people on the front door. As simple as it sounds, like I didn't know the millions of jobs that go into working there. So yeah, just clearing up these positions so people can see it as a career they can have. And similarly, just these careers being shared in schools and more visible for people. Yeah, just basically what I said. And intergenerational networking opportunities is really important to network. I think young artists don't exactly know about networking as such. I know when I was younger and I tried to go to networking events, I think for a whole year I lied about my age because I couldn't get into anywhere. So I told everyone I was 18 when I was 15. And that's something that is quite stressful, especially traveling to these places at 15 and trying to act older to sort of talk about these things. So just sort of breaking down that barrier that, you know, someone that's 50 and has had a career in the arts for, you know, forever, and they're so successful, should be able to talk to someone that's 15 and trying to get into it, and just making these opportunities, first of all, seen and spread across the region so that everyone can hear about them. So it's an equal opportunity, and just making sure they exist as well, and just putting them on and promoting them, if anything, is really good. The ones I've been to. And lastly, I'm almost done, I'm over time. More activities for young people at earlier stages through education and arts organisations. I think when I was in sixth form, I went to a sixth form that was, I'd say, a bit more posher than the secondary school I went to, because we didn't have a sixth form. And the opportunities we had there, I would have never have got in secondary school because of the area it was in. And it was great opportunities. I won a contest that we had to have an exhibition at the end of sixth form. And I know that if it was in the area I sort of grew up in, because I had to travel like hours to get to the sixth form, if it was in the area I grew up in, I'd have never had the opportunity. But I would have still, I would have still been the same person I am. So it is about making sure that these opportunities going into schools are great, but making sure it's across the region, and making sure it's going to schools that, you know, don't get anyone in, or schools that are really working class, or schools that are really sort of diverse and don't fit the quota that the traditional art gallery has, the image of it anyway. So just making sure that these things are you know, if you're an arts organization thinking, let's reach out to a school, maybe don't reach out to the school that has lots of programs like this or is in a more, you know, affluent area. Try and reach out and do work that's like across, because these are the people that have actual, you know, all schools have talent, but to find like a diamond in a place that, you know, could have gone unnoticed is so amazing. So it makes the experience even more amazing. So yeah, just to sum up, so examples to learn from. So these are just people I've worked with, or I really recommend just looking into: Rising Arts Agency, Project Zazi, Simple's Carnival and their community outreach projects, Boom, Satsuma, and Integrate UK. So yeah, that is that. And thank you everyone for listening. I will now stop.
Thanks, Abby. You took us on a journey. It was really nice to get into the recommendations to what they actually, you know, what some of them are and where they came from. So thanks for going over them. It's really great. And then last but not least, I will have Woodrow.
Hello, everyone. It's great to see you all, and thank you so much to the previous speakers. And Abby, I think very much you represent an example to learn from today. I think it's really fantastic to hear Abby, Yasmin, Miles, and Helen speaking. Just to describe myself to start off with, my name's Woodrow Kernahan. I'm the director of John Hansard Gallery and co-chair of Visual Arts Southwest, along with Helen Cammock. I'm a middle-aged white man wearing glasses with curly hair and a black jumper with grey acoustic panels behind me. So I've really enjoyed listening to the other speakers, as I already said, and I think it's incredibly inspiring to hear the personal stories, experiences, and reflections. And I particularly kind of responded to the importance of payment and money in terms of supporting artists. But really, Yasmin's point around hovering, I can really relate to that as an excellent kind of experience, and having done that myself for many years. And the kind of repeating around the aspect of joy, I really took those key messages away. So initially I was going to stay on camera, on screen while speaking, but responding to what Yasmin said in terms of the question, do I belong here? I thought I might share an image of an artwork that we have in John Hansard Gallery. So hopefully everyone can see that. So please do tell me if that can't be seen. So You Belong Here is an artwork by the artist Aston Holmes Elliott in partnership with Breakout Youth. And it's currently the neon that you can see is installed in the foyer of John Hansard Gallery. But it originally, the identity for You Belong Here was developed by Aston in collaboration with Breakout Youth. That's a youth LGBT support network in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. And the You Belong Here was developed as an identity for the network, as creating and holding a safe space. And that was created alongside the exhibition, the opening exhibition we had at the John Hansard Gallery by Gerhard Richter. And subsequently, that was developed into a neon artwork, which has become permanently installed in the foyer of John Hansard Gallery. So I thought I would put that on in the background instead of me as a kind of speaking on screen. So Together We Will has been an essential and urgent project for creating and holding space to listen, and it's been very positive to be part of this process through the role as co-chair of Visual Arts Southwest. So I really wanted to thank Nella, Rosa, Paula, all the advisory groups and chairs, and it's been amazing to see the recommendations that have been released today. Since coronavirus and the lockdown, George Floyd's murder and the Black Lives Matter movement, organizations have rightly been going through a process of reflection and change. And Together We Will, within this, has been an essential listening process. And the recommendations are the essential messages around organizational cultures, employment and pay, programming, professional development, application processes, and developing connections. Now what we have to do is hear and act to bring about the change. And so bringing about change is a challenging process in itself. And I've done a few change programs myself, and the models of change come in unusual models, like the stages of change can be defined as unfreezing, changing, and refreezing, or the change curve around, which is similar to a grief curve, around denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I think these would be the wrong kind of models of change, I would argue. And together we will encourages us towards a continuous cycle of change, and change as an ongoing process. So I think this aspect of creating and holding space, listening and hearing, and bringing about continuous change really speaks positively from the recommendations that have been released today. So I would take those recommendations, having read them as a toolkit or a framework for listening rather than a rule book. And something I wanted to do, rather than going through the action plan that we have at John Hansard Gallery, was just to highlight a couple of key developments that have been developed through the Together We Will process and have begun to bring changes at the gallery. So back in June 2020, we developed a staff task force that was self-initiated and grew to review, reflect, and help us revise our plans, policies, and procedures. And we've been working very closely alongside the University of Southampton, which we are a part of, in the development of their equality, diversity, and inclusion strategy, and also working closely in partnership with the Southampton 2025 bid team around developing a series of inclusion workshops for organisations in Southampton to develop inclusion pledges as part of the 2025 bid process. So there's really fantastic echoes with the Together We Will process. And a really crucial aspect, responding to particularly what Helen, Miles, Yasmin, and Abby were saying, is the importance of artists and younger voices within organisations. And so most recently, we've created and appointed 2 artists into paid roles on our strategic board, have developed a new progressive approach to working with artists, which is something that evolved out of the response to the coronavirus, which is working on multiple projects with artists, developed initially from smaller projects or smaller presentations, working towards commissions and then larger solo presentations. And something we're also looking at presently is piloting a shared model of leadership, which is looking at creating guest roles within the senior management of the gallery to bring about change. I could go through kind of the action plan and points that the gallery is working on. And I think lots of organizations and groups have action plans, and they're doing lots of work. But rather than going through that, I thought this is a really important and exciting opportunity to open up to the room and kind of create space for questions, and to for me to ask the rest of the panel questions. So handing back to Nella.
I wanted to ask you all, because you've done so much, do you have any sort of vital support structure in mind that you wish you had when you were starting out, but maybe you didn't, and that you wish could be the norm when people get into the visual arts as a professional endeavor?
One of the things that I think is really important is to somehow to find somebody who believes in you. And I think what we're talking about is a kind of formalizing of that. So we're talking about whether that's in school or whether that's in institutions or whether that's a kind of a network experience, but also kind of personally. And I think it's a real struggle. And I think that actually it's one of the most difficult having had a profession before this profession, I feel like it's one of the most difficult professions to find your way, to navigate and to start off. It's not like, you know, you come out of art school, or maybe you haven't been to art school, but you come out and you decide it's something you're interested in, and it's really, really difficult to try and find your way. So I think this idea that you have one kind of support is a kind of, that's a starting point. And what we've been talking about and what we're hearing is how important it is that you have multiple places or sites for support. So I think, I mean, that's the only thing that I can say that I wished I had more of, but I also came quite late to working as an artist, and I think I came with, you know, maybe a relationship that was long-term that supported me. I had friends that were, even if they thought I was crazy changing career, they were there and they believed in me even if they didn't get what I was doing. So I felt like I was lucky enough to have these kinds of support systems in place. Take myself back, if I'd gone straight to art school, it would have been a very different matter. And I think there's something that we need to understand about people at different points in their career as artists, and what different people will need, and in terms of their own personal experience, the things that they will need. So we're back to the whole thing is, you know, equity is not the same service, the same support, the same system. Equity is about ensuring that everyone gets what they need. So I guess I'm coming from that place.
I hear you. I was thinking the same, that obviously there's never like it's not one size fits all solution with any of this, because people come from totally different perspectives. But yeah, Miles, I feel like you got ready to say something.
Yeah, it was, I mean, I think I actually jumped straight off that point you just made about people not necessarily benefiting from this idea of a one size fits all model. And I think a thing I wish I had gotten aware of earlier on was how many people are really making it up as they go along, and an okayness with that. I think there's an element of self-trust involved, and there's an element of, you know, developing confidence in your flexibility to adapt to stuff. But yeah, I wish I knew sooner how many people had less of a plan, or had changed plan, or whose plans didn't work, or, you know, started out doing one thing and actually that led them to something else. I think we see a lot of really linear narratives online that make for spectacular stories, but at least in my experience, and I think the experience of most of my closest peers, an awareness of actually the different tangles that have been examined along the way, and the ways in which things haven't been straightforward, would have settled my nerves earlier on, and made me more willing to lean into the process without so much of a focus on end goals and outcomes. But that's me from my perspective.
I think for me, it was just knowledge of knowing like what the art sector is. And that sounds very basic, but like, what is it? Like when you're younger, you don't really know. You go to a gallery, but you have no idea who's behind the door and what they're doing. And I think it was like important for me when I was, I think I was like 16, 17, at the Arnolfini, which I ended up working at, which was like really funny. I was like part of the young sort of artist group. And it was kind of, as much as it was just going there and like making art and like meeting other people that liked art, it was kind of a little introduction into like how they ran things behind the scenes, which was really like interesting to me, because I like making art, but I didn't know the word exhibition really. Like I knew it was a room with art on the wall. So just sort of seeing like the behind the scenes things and just knowing what's going on kind of breaks down that thing that you shouldn't be there. Because, you know, if you have like a school trip when you're younger, you see all the nice rooms they've decorated, but you don't know what like the closet looks like, what they're hiding. So like just sort of being really open and showing things and inviting people in so that they can see what's actually going on.
I think that aspect of demystifying the process is really important, and because I worked at a gallery learning how to put up exhibitions and kind of seeing how exhibitions were made and built, and how artworks, what they looked like before they were on the wall or before they were put in a video player. But I think what Helen was saying as well about that every journey is different. I think all the very interesting and successful artists I know all have completely different, unique paths and experiences. But I think if I would take Yasmin's word of hovering as being really insightful in this mix, because I think that those different paths but I think there's hovering often involved, and that I wish I had known to hover when I was 15 or 16. I think I was up to mischief at that point.
Yasmin, I feel like you've been mentioned twice, but you don't have to reflect on this anymore if you feel like you've had a good run earlier.
No, that was okay. I was collecting what I was thinking, but yeah, it's funny because a big part for me was just going to a place where I knew, like, okay, there's people here, because I keep thinking about the Pervasive Media Studio in Bristol, because it's somewhere where a big part of their contracts with the people that are there are like, you have to be interruptible, so you have to be able to go up to them and be like, what are you doing? You're sitting there, why are you sitting there? So it's like going to a space where you're allowed to just like turn up and just be there. Turning up is allowed. Like it's sort of when people say to me like, but I could never like go, someone's spoken that you just go up to them. I'm like, but going to a place where that's just a normal thing, just go in, go for it. I feel like I have another character in my head. Like when I go to networking events, I turn into someone else and I'm like, I want to be confident. I'm going to say what I want. And it's like not real to me because it's not really me. I'm just being this like exaggerated part of myself. So it's just sort of like having that, confidence to just go up and challenge something or just see what happens if you say that thing to someone. And like I enjoyed when I was at university going to the city talks, Artists in the City, the Arnold Feeney stuff, where you could kind of be in a space where you technically didn't really look like a student. You could just say a question and see what happened. And maybe you could leave and no one would know who you are, but like finding spaces that you can challenge things that are safe and that you can explore different subjects and hear different people. But it's great to really hear from others and their perspectives, because it can really spark something else for you. And it was great going to talks where I'd give out my card randomly and be like, hey, I think you're really cool. And then I'd give them a card and then I'd walk off. And then I got an email not that long ago. It was like, oh, you gave me your card like 3 years ago. And I wanted to ask, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, well, that's mad. Like that's a thing that happens. So yeah, there's so many different ways that can work, but just to go for it and have the confidence to just be in the space. It's just about turning up, just turn up, be there and see what happens really.
I think the reason why this whole hovering thing also resonated with me because is that I'm also a hoverer. I worked in the same institution for 6 years and I was always hovering and trying to say yes to everything. And I think looking back at that path, something that I feel I wish I had as a support at the time. I really wish I was working on a casual contract. I had 6, I think, casual contracts in the same place at the same time at some point. So I had like, you know, multiple different jobs, and basically I have a job, or technically I have a job, but then there's always this thing of never knowing whether I'll be invited back because it doesn't commit the institution to me. So there was always that kind of acknowledgement of the risk that I might be let go any moment and I'm no longer needed. And therefore I wasn't really part of it. There's this idea of not belonging because it's not formalized enough through a contract that's somehow substantial. But there's something where they can lean on you if they need you, but if they don't need you anymore, then they can kind of chuck you. So there was that kind of discomfort. And I think it was amplified by things like not having a proper desk space that would be mine, but I had to move around other workers. So then you don't ever get to kind of have this sense of being acknowledged in the office. But then the kind of core support that was there was definitely all these other casual workers who were really pushing for the trade union, you know, and who were really having these kind of important rights and pay contract conversations and pushing them in a really meaningful way. So then, yeah, there are lots of different mechanisms that can be really empowering when you feel a bit downtrodden by the kind of institutional structure that's operating around you.
I just wondered, as I was listening to that discussion, I was just thinking about how, you know, being, you know, proximity is really important, right? And I know that there are voices that aren't in this space as well. And, you know, what we do to ensure that, you know, it's easier to hover when the place you're hovering is down the road or maybe a short bus ride away, or, you know, you can jump on an electric scooter, as I would, but not everyone can or would do that or can do that. So yeah, I was just wondering about like maybe the benefits of technology and like online spaces making that a bit more inclusive, but that doesn't include everyone. I guess that's more of a question for the other people on the panel, how they felt about the art workers outside of the bigger cities.
I was just thinking it's been great as part of the Together We Will campaign that it did happen in the pandemic in a way, because it was being able to bring those conversations from people across, like, yeah, the Southwest, and just seeing, or just in different areas of the UK, of hearing their perspectives and being able to meet other people. Because I know in the Young Art Workers one, at the end we were able to sort of share our details, and I actually met up with a person from that group and we connected really well, and it was like this nice little moment. So it's just, that's been a weirdly, I know for a lot of people it's quite strange and it's not always the nicest to have it on Zoom, but it's just, it has been brilliant to be able to host something that can really engage a lot of different people, and it can be, and obviously accessibility as well, and not having to, like you said, just find a way to go to places. Because I think my friends ask me that, who live in different cities, they're like, that's great, Yaz, you're in Bristol, you're always talking about this, but we literally live in the middle of nowhere, so how do I do that? And I'm always just like, that's true, like I don't want to keep going on like, oh, I'm Bristol, woo. But then also it's just like, how do you, like, yeah, spread it out, and how, because I know that's something that is being considered of sort of with all the policies that come into place, how are we going to like bring other organizations in and guarantee they're going to sort of step up and do the work? And it's just, maybe Zoom, maybe online, maybe that's the way we pull people in, or there's like sort of specific funds that can bring people physically to a place, and that's something that's not an afterthought of, oh, we can pay for this. It's like, no, this is the main part of it, is we're going to literally pick you up and bring you here, and that could be amazing if that was something. But yeah, that's what I think, I guess.
I guess maybe there's some responsibility for institutions to actually work outside of themselves. So, you know, generally museums and institutions are based in cities, and it's really important that they consider different spaces, maybe whether that's for exhibitions or whether it's for kind of events or festivals or talks or screenings. Or so there is the online, but there are also many people who are not so comfortable necessarily with the technology of online. And I guess the responsibility shouldn't always be for people to have to migrate to the cities or migrate to the institutions or the museums. There's something about the flip side of that, and the recognition that actually it's really important to be nimble and to move and to kind of shape yourself in different ways, as a kind of art institution or a art school. You know, if you're trying to kind of encourage people to come into the arts, there's something about the responsibility to go out rather than always expecting prospective students, for example, to come to open days. There's something else that can happen that could be interesting. So I think it is about just kind of, I guess, shaking up the power dynamics, really, and shaking up the kind of structures that we are used to and that we kind of live within, because we're not going to kind of affect the right kind of changes unless we recognize that there's something problematic about the structures at the moment. So I think it's a great point, actually, Miles. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, there is a question in the chat. Shall I read the question out, or Nella, do you want to do that? It just popped up.
You can go for it.
Okay, it's a question from Tony. I just wanted to explore the representation of the research and the representation of people who are not here, such as disenfranchised men and people with other disabilities. How are we addressing conformity bias and benevolence bias? I guess that's a question that I think kind of goes back to what Abby was saying about disability being mixing my words, diversity being a positive thing and joyous, and diversity being understood in its widest sense. So I think that would be my understanding, that diversity would be inclusive of such groups as I've suggested, and wouldn't be understood as being exclusive of those groups.
Maybe something I could say in response to that. Sorry, I took a little while, Woodrow. I was kind of digesting that question too when you were reading it out. I think an important point about this kind of a project is that this is the first run of trying to do something like this, where, you know, Visual Arts Southwest has reached out to perhaps a wider demographic in the Southwest than historically. to make itself known as someone that the sector can kind of turn to with certain kinds of questions, and perhaps for a certain kind of support. And I would like to see this as an ongoing thing. And I think we will have to keep evaluating the successes and shortcomings of this project as we go on. And if, as and when we identify those shortcomings, and if there are any particular voices that have been excluded from this project because of certain kinds of mechanics at play, if you will, then we will have to address those in the next round. So this is something that is not a complete product that will now solve all of our problems, but it's a first step, and it's a point from which to start further exploration into all kinds of things that we could make better in the sector. So there are also, just to be fully transparent, the reports that we received from the advisory group facilitators across the 4 groups, they also did address in those reports that the attendance in those groups was limited in terms of who was in the room, and that perhaps that's something that needs further work or exploration going forward. So that's an ongoing consideration, and hopefully also the changes in the pandemic circumstances bring some options for us how we can do work like this in the future, whether we can also meet maybe in person rather than only online.
I had a question I wanted to ask the other panelists, if that's okay. It was a couple of years ago, I went to an equity symposium with colleagues and friends from Southampton, and amongst them were quite senior arts professionals who had worked for over 20 years in arts and diversity questions. And it was a very positive symposium, but my colleagues kind of said that they had been to the same symposium 20 years ago, and things hadn't changed. And so I think the conversation in the past 18 months, because of the opportunity to be on Zoom together like this, and the kind of collective social movements, have really accelerated the possibility of change. But how do we ensure that this change does take place and there isn't another 20 years or 5 years and that change hasn't manifested?
I mean, one brief initial point, which and I think it's a really fantastic question, particularly when we look back and we see that a lot of the challenges we're facing aren't new and are recurrent and are old challenges rather than new ones, or old challenges that have taken on new appearances sometimes. I think for me, one of the fantastic things is the creation of new institutions alongside looking at how existing ones can change. So like Rising in the Southwest is, I think, a really fantastic example of creating something that there was an absolute need for, in addition to also looking at how organizations can move with the time, for lack of a better phrase. I know Abby could probably talk about Rising a bit better than I can, but I think what they've done is fantastic, and we need more of that action.
Yeah, just carry that point on. For an example, Rising is just a really good example of having a group that can work alongside organizations and help sort of direct and sort of assist them in the right kind of direction to go in, basically. I know I've got loads of work through Rising, and without that kind of group in between that sort of support also helps you find, but then even within a position is helping you like reflect throughout your job. I know whilst I was working, I keep bringing up the same work I've done, whilst I was working at the Arnolfini, I got that through Rising, and we have just regular meetings like monthly between like my staff that I work with and Rising groups to sort of talk about any issues, add them out in like a free open space and assess things that are going well and things that aren't going well, and make plans, and then we come back to that a month later and see what worked, what didn't work, and how we can just sort of keep on making sure it's like a safe environment, and things, when things crop up, how we deal with them and how we'd like them to be dealt with. So it's just like that consistent reflection of what's happening, really. Yeah.
I would just say it's probably following up on something that Abby said earlier, which is this idea that we have to believe it. So if we believe that diversity and inclusiveness is important, then we have to stand by it and we have to work towards it in every single aspect of our lives. So it's not something that we just suddenly slip into work mode and decide that that's going to happen. It has to infiltrate our very being. And if it infiltrates your very being, you feel that you can't be in a space where you can't speak it. And it's the speaking it that I feel hasn't really, you know, maybe there were people who were working around equity and equality and diversity as the language of that has changed over the years. They've been kind of banging their heads against brick walls because the language and the thinking and the feeling wasn't shared. And actually that for me feels like it's starting to shift and change. And I think one of the things that's been really clear about this talk this afternoon is that actually we need to listen to people who are going to be taking everything forward. Like the voices of young people have never really been heard. So when I was young, when Woodrow was young, you know, we might have had these conversations, but we never had platforms like this to talk about it because people weren't really interested or didn't really believe us because they thought we had no experience. And so that's one of the changes that I'm seeing here today, how articulate and insightful the kinds of ideas and thoughts and strategies that are being talked about by people much younger than myself. And that's something that I believe is different from before. And it's just like, I mean, I talk about it all the time in my practice, this idea of cycles in history, that nothing is linear and things always keep coming around. And if we believe they'll keep coming around, we can also believe that when they come around, they'll shift and they'll shift a little bit more and things will change and things will move forward or backwards or to the side. But if the conversations are happening, then we have to believe that something is going to somehow shift each time these conversations keep turning around.
Thank you, Helen. I think that's a wonderful note to end on. So I think we could perhaps wrap up for the day. I also know that a lot of we've lost some people along the way who've had to continue with their day's work. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And thank you, all the speakers. You've been just as magical as I knew you would be. So it's been really, really excellent to have you. And yes, we'll be sharing the event online afterwards, and please take a look at the recommendations for best practice when you have a moment, and I hope there's something there for you to get inspired by and change how you work. Thanks everyone.